If you don't want to drink artificial sweeteners, you don't have to. But to say that if you do, it's going to make you fat, it's nonsense.
What research publications have you done?
Switching topics, we got to talk more about artificial sweeteners, a big pet peeve of mine, yours as well. Is there one artificial sweetener that's better than the rest? People seem to think stevia is the holy grail and it's an exception to all of them. Is there certain ones that are just no and some that are like yes? Like, let's speak to that.
So this kind of gets down to the naturalism fallacy, right? Oh, if something's natural, it must be better for you. Now, I haven't seen any research data that suggests that stevia has any downsides in humans, but I also haven't seen any research that suggests aspartame or sucralose has any downsides either. So what I will say is that aspartame and sucralose have far more safety data on them than stevia does. Now, I don't think any of them are bad for you, to be quite honest. I'm not saying that aspartame or sucralose is better than stevia. But again, this gets back to this fallacy and this obsession we have with naturalism. And I feel like people who get obsessed with naturalism have just never taken chemistry. Like, once you understand that everything is a chemical, like literally everything is a chemical, you become less obsessed with this idea of natural, because you realize that it's all just a bunch of chemicals together. What we should really be concerned with is, okay, this particular molecule or this particular chemical, be it natural or not natural, is it good or bad for us? Or what might be the positives or downsides? And here's the other thing people don't want. Maybe some things have good things and bad things. That for certain populations, they're good, and others it might not be. I mean, caffeine is one of those, right? Like, they've shown that with certain polymorphisms on your genes, caffeine can have a really high risk factor for heart attacks. But for other people, caffeine appears to have some kind of protective effect on heart disease if you have certain polymorphisms. So that's another argument, but it's important to understand. With regards to artificial sweeteners, again, none has really emerged as necessarily being safer than the others. I mean, the hate you hear for sucralose and aspartame is pretty loud. And again, I think it's like this, I've thought a lot about this. Why are people so religious about this? And it really is like, it's a religious cult. And I think it's the same way that any religious cult is kind of. Remember, like, look at the most extreme religions. It's like, you know, you can only have sex in the missionary position and don't look at each other in the eyes. You know, it's like anything that you might find pleasurable or fun, they have to poo-poo it, right? You have to feel bad about something that's good. And I think that's just it. It's like, oh, well, you shouldn't be able to have something that tastes good and also enjoy it, but not have calories. That's sinful, you know? It's the same sort of mentality. And it's like, okay, but I'll even have people say, okay, well, it's not better than water. I don't know. Doesn't seem to be any worse than water. I mean, just be quite honest. And it's like, okay, great. If you want to drink water. But for the rest of us who like enjoy having something like that, and I can't tell you also the number of people who have reached out to me and said, man, if it wasn't for diet soda, I wouldn't have lost 50, 100 pounds. I even had a few people reach out and say I was able to kick alcoholism because, you know, people who are alcoholics are just so used to drinking something throughout the day that's flavored compared to just water, that diet soda for them can be a real, like, literal lifesaver. So I understand when people say that the whole, well, let's just drink more water. Yeah, hey, I'm all for water. But, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? Like, for some people, this is the consequence, this gets into unintended consequences of good advice, meaning try to omit processed foods, try to just drink water. Well, some people don't do well with that. And when they break, they just end up drinking sugary soda because they think that diet soda is worse for you than sugary soda. But it's not. It's absolutely not worse for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's pros and cons of everything. The sugar being replaced with the artificial sweeteners is one worse than the other. Well, it depends. I mean, if I'm in a bike race and I need some calories, I'm drinking some sugar and I'm drinking it now. Don't give me a diet pop. Give me full, well, and with caffeine. Give me Coke with caffeine in it because that'll give me some more energy as well. But if I'm trying to be in a calorie deficit and I'm having a hard time getting there, and I'm drinking a liter of pop a day, well, just by that one switch alone, I'm in that deficit. So how bad could it really be?
Yeah, I mean, it all gets like, let's say there were some possible negative downsides to diet soda, which we still really haven't found them, and I'll address the ones that people say. But for an obese person, what's worse? Like maybe, disrupting their gut microbiome a little bit, or them being 100 pounds overweight. I don't know about you, but I'll take the getting 100 pounds off. Now, let's get into some of these, if you're good with it, some of these claims that people make about artificial sweeteners. And the most popular one now is they destroy your gut microbiome. So the idea that they destroy your gut microbiome was based on a study, in vitro study, which is in a petri dish, on a strain of E. coli that they weren't even really studying. The goal was not to study like sucralose. It was to study just this bioluminescence that they were using. But they found that, sucralose was toxic to these E. coli. So what? You're taking something, you're adding it directly on a petri dish to something else. I'm not saying that that's worthless, but it's pretty far down the rung of what we consider like the hierarchy of evidence. In vitro stuff is pretty far down there. You can show a lot of things in a petri dish that don't pan out in an actual person. So the only studies, and I want to be very clear, the only studies that show any effects of artificial sweeteners on the gut microbiome are in vitro studies with high doses and in rodents with extremely high doses. There are 0 studies in humans showing this. In fact, we have a couple now studies, randomized control trials in humans where they give diet soda or artificial sweeteners to people, and they found that it did not change their gut microbiome at all.
And if people are so worried about gut microbiome, why don't they do the other things that actually matter? Like, what percentage of people aren't eating enough fiber in the diet? 90%? 95%? So let's all shit on Diet Coke. Oh, Coach Greg says you can drink Diet Coke. So what? Oh, Coach Greg's cookbook, it's a cancer cookbook because there's optional recipes where you can add artificial sweeteners. You don't have to, it's up to you. But yet my book promotes all 4 food groups, fruits and vegetables, lots of fiber. And last I checked, you need a lot of fiber in your diet to be healthy for your gut microbiome. But let's all shit on diet pop. Let's just drink regular pop and not have any fiber. Let's not eat fruit and vegetables. Let's just drink regular pop. And Coach Greg's an idiot. Stupid.
Yeah, a girl I went to University of Illinois with, who was in the same lab as me, her name's Suzanne Devkota. She's actually one of the leading researchers in the world now in the gut microbiome. And we had her to our office for our podcast a couple years ago. And we were like, oh, do you want something to drink? She's like, yeah, I'll take Coke Zero. Okay, cool. And so the first thing I asked her, I'm like, well, what do you think of this stuff and gut microbiome? And she was like, I think if you're a lab rat getting a huge dose, it's probably bad. But if you're a human drinking a few diet sodas a day, I don't think it makes any difference at all. And this is somebody who studies this for a living, right? And it was so funny. Some of the comments we got was, no real gut microbiome expert would drink diet soda. And it's like, what research publications have you done? Like, it's just insane, the level of like religious zealotry around artificial sweeteners. And again, I think it's one of those things where people are like, it's like, well, how dare you have something that tastes good and that doesn't have calories? We can't have that. And so the other popular myths you hear is, okay, it gives you cancer. Again, show me the human studies. Show me. You cannot find them other than weak epidemiological data. And in high doses in animals, you can find it. Well, great. Do a high enough dose of anything in a lab rat will give it cancer. Okay. And oh, by the way, in some of those cancer studies, they didn't even have different rates of mortality. So that's a whole other thing. But the idea it gives you cancer, not supported by research. The other thing that I hear a lot is, well, it increases your insulin because when you drink something sweet, your body has to release insulin. It's like, okay, well, let's examine that. If you actually increased insulin in response to a diet soda, and you're not eating carbohydrate, you would either one, go hypoglycemic, or you would you must be releasing glucagon in opposition to that in order to counter that, which glucagon would basically nullify the effects of insulin. So again, we're back to the point where it doesn't actually matter. Now, they've done studies on this. It doesn't increase insulin. It doesn't decrease insulin sensitivity. In fact, I think in one meta-analysis, they actually showed a slight improvement in insulin sensitivity, probably due to weight loss, because people lost weight when they were drinking diet soda, which leads me to my next point. People say, well, diet soda will make you fat because it disrupts your insulin signaling, and your body's expecting calories, so it actually makes you hungrier and you eat more. So this is an example of hacking together mechanisms to try to prove what you want to prove. So again, like I said, what happens when we actually just give people diet soda instead of water? Do they overeat? Do they get fat? No. In none of the randomized human control trials do people gain weight on diet soda compared to water. And in fact, in probably over half of them, people actually lose weight. And in there were several meta-analyses that looked at diet soda versus water, and the conclusion was that diet soda actually induces weight loss. So you can hack together all the mechanisms you want, but it doesn't make it true.
And I covered this in a video posted on my Instagram, and the hate. Oh my goodness, the hate. People can't accept it. No, you're going to gain weight. Well, the actual study showed the opposite. They were not only losing more weight, they kept more of it off, and they had increased satiety, so they're actually less hungry. And let's argue that it does make you hungrier. Oh, I drank Diet Coke, it made me hungrier. Have another Diet Coke. And another, and about 50 more. Are you getting fat? Are you getting fat from drinking more of these low-calorie sweeteners? How? It's making you hungrier. Or the alternative, don't have the Diet Coke and have the pop. You just had that 150 calories. Calories in, calories out. You need to be in a surplus. So if you're just having artificial sweeteners, how are you in that surplus? Even if it's screwing up, and even if they're right, and your insulin response is and metabolism this, you still need to eat in a surplus to gain the weight. So, I mean, how is it a bad thing? Now, granted, if you don't want to drink artificial sweeteners, you don't have to. But to say that if you do, it's going to make you fat, it's nonsense. Eating extra calories are going to make you fat. So don't drink a Diet Coke and use it as an excuse to eat a freaking big ice cream sandwich. I mean, use common sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is the mystery around what are these artificial chemicals and what. So okay, aspartame, it's phenylalanine and aspartic acid. It's a dipeptide with I think it's chlorinated as well, and it just so happens to fit in the taste receptor well. And it's 200 times sweeter than sugar. So the amount of aspartame that's actually in a Diet Coke is very, very small. I think it's like 50 milligrams. It's very, very small. Sucralose is 600 times sweeter than sugar. So it's so sweet, you just need like a little bit of it.
Speck.
And so the idea that it's going to do all these things. How? You're getting such a small amount. Like people say, aspartame, or this is the other one. People say aspartame has cytotoxins and neurotoxins. I covered this recently. So they're referring to phenylalanine and aspartic acid. Those are excitotoxins if you put them on a petri dish with neurons. So is glutamate, by the way. So are a lot of amino acids and a lot of different things that are in our bloodstream. First off, the brain has this thing called the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't just let anything into your brain because you die, okay? Second thing is you get 20 times more phenylalanine in a freaking steak, in 3 ounces of steak. You don't have a steak and then immediately get Alzheimer's. The people, again, it's people who haven't had basic chemistry, haven't had basic physiology, or if they had, they're just ignoring it because this fits their narrative. So, there's no evidence of any of that stuff. Again, I would never say if you should drink artificial sweeteners. They certainly don't if you don't want to, but it doesn't appear at this point we have over 50 years of data at this point. I mean, you would think there'd at least be one human trial that would have showed something if these things were actually bad for you, and they just don't. They just don't.
Absolutely. If it was that bad, something would come of it right now. But what we do know is obesity is bad, and if having a Diet Coke helps prevent that, at least you die shredded. Let's say it does cause it. Hey, at least I
Bury me
died
in a big
with 100
fucking
pounds
box.
less body fat on my body, because morbid obesity is certainly going to increase your risk of death. If you can lose that, you decrease your risk there. Even if it's worse, you're decreasing your risk there, increasing it here. It's still balanced out, but you die short. I mean,
and I always tell people, I'm like, you're making these statements based on your feelings. Like, do you want to care about data or do you want to care about feelings? So I always start off with every post of like, data greater than sign feelings, because if we're going to talk about feelings, like we're not doing science anymore.